Owning wild animals might give some people a sense of power, but it can also lead to disaster. Consider the following cases. A man in New York secretly kept a tiger as a pet in his apartment, until the day it turned on him. A deer enthusiast raised several of them in his backyard, attempting to tame them, but one day, the worst happened. A 56-year-old woman, obsessed with snakes, was bitten by the black mamba she kept as a pet. What first seemed like a tragic accident soon uncovered something even more unsettling. In September 2003, in Harlem, New York, Antoine Yates was discovered keeping wild animals as pets. In April 2000, Antoine, a 31-year-old part-time taxi driver, purchased Ming, an 8-week-old male tiger, from Bearcat Hollow Animal Park in Racine, Minnesota. He had previously acquired a lion cub from the same place, but sold it shortly after bringing Ming home. Tall and slender, Yates was seen as friendly and kind by many of his neighbors. He lived in apartment 5E of the Drew Hamilton Houses, a public housing complex. To keep his animals under control and prevent anyone from discovering them, he spent as little time away from home as possible. On September 30th, 2003, Antoine went to the emergency room at Harlem Hospital Center with bite wounds on his arm and leg. While speaking with doctors and nurses, he claimed his injuries had been caused by his pet pit bull. However, the medical staff grew suspicious. The size of the bite marks suggested an animal with a much larger jaw. In reality, Yates had been attacked while trying to separate Ming from Shadow, a cat he had recently adopted. Regarding the incident, Yates later recounted that Ming had started chasing Shadow, and he attempted to intervene, putting himself between them. Ming attacked, biting him and shaking him violently. When the tiger finally clamped down on Yates' knee, he thought he wouldn't survive. Fortunately, the worst didn't happen. Antoine didn't lose any limbs and was discharged the same day. However, suspicious of his claims, hospital staff alerted the authorities. Upon receiving the tip, officers were dispatched to Yates' apartment. Neighbors, who had long been disturbed by strange noises coming from the unit, didn't hesitate to report their concerns. They saw this as an opportunity to put an end to the ongoing issue. Residents described hearing odd sounds and loud thuds from the apartment, with one even guiding the police to the exact location. As officers positioned themselves outside the door, they heard loud noises, furniture scraping across the floor, deep growls, and guttural snarls. Authorities were certain that a large animal was inside the apartment. The NYPD's Technical Assistance Response Unit drilled holes into the walls of the neighboring apartment and used a small camera to inspect the interior. Meanwhile, Officer Martin Duffy rappelled from the rooftop to get a closer look through the windows. That's when Ming roared at Duffy, revealing his presence. Duffy immediately fired a tranquilizer dart from his rifle. The dart had been prepared by Dr. Robert Cook, then the chief veterinarian of the Wildlife Conservation Society, which managed the city's zoos. After being struck, Ming lunged at the window where Duffy had fired from, shattering the glass before retreating back inside. Authorities waited several minutes for the sedative to take effect before sending in an animal control team. To ensure the tiger remained unconscious during transport, Dr. Cook administered a second dose of sedative. It took more than 6 men to carry the massive tiger into the elevator and down to the waiting transport truck. During the operation, the team also discovered a 5-foot-long alligator that Yates had been keeping in one of the apartment's other rooms. Antoine was later located at the hospital and prevented from leaving. After Ming's discovery, questioning of the neighbors revealed that the tiger's existence had been known for at least 3 years, but it was regarded as something of an urban legend. Yates frequently purchased large quantities of chicken from the local supermarket, and a recurring joke among building residents was that he must have been eating an enormous amount of chicken every day. A downstairs neighbor knew he kept animals at home, but was unaware of exactly what kind. She added that one morning, when she opened her windows, she was hit with a strong and unpleasant odor coming from his apartment. Yates was arrested at the hospital where he had been treated. He later pleaded guilty to reckless endangerment and was sentenced to 5 months in jail and 5 years of probation. After serving 3 months, he was released and attempted to sue the city of New York for the loss of his animals. However, a judge dismissed the case, calling the lawsuit audacious. Authorities relocated the confiscated animals to more suitable homes. Ming was sent to an animal sanctuary in Berlin Center, Ohio, while the alligator was rehomed in Indiana. Ming lived at the Ohio sanctuary until his passing on February 4, 2019. His remains were cremated and buried at the Hartsdale Pet Cemetery in New York. According to the sanctuary's director, Ming had a very good life after being rescued. In November 2010, in Wascom, Texas, Gerald Rushton kept various species of deer in the backyard of his home. At 67 years old, he was no longer able to perform many of the tasks he once could. However, his admiration and love for deer never changed. For a long time, Gerald had dedicated himself to raising and collecting different species of these animals, varying in size and weight. His home in southern Wascom was spacious and part of a beautiful property. It provided everything he needed to care for, feed, and maintain his animals in peace. And that was exactly what he cherished most. Nothing compared to his beloved creatures. Among the species Rushton kept were axis deer, also known as cheetal, a native of the Indian subcontinent, admired for its beauty and considered one of the most iconic members of the Cervidae family. However, perhaps the most magnificent creature in his collection was the red deer, one of the largest species in the Cervidae family. Known for its imposing presence, the red deer is particularly admired for the impressive antlers of the males, which grow anew each year. Owning one of these deer in the United States is more challenging compared to other native or exotic species. However, Gerald never let anything stop him from caring for his beloved creatures. On the morning of Friday, November 5, 2010, Rushton left his house and headed toward the enclosure where he kept his prized animals. Feeding them was a routine part of his day. Besides him, some family members were at home. One of his granddaughters watched as he entered the fenced area, ready to tend to the animals. However, as Gerald approached one of the red deer, something unexpected happened. The animal became aggressive in a way he had never seen before. According to his granddaughter's account and the later police investigation, when Rushton got close, the deer pressed him against the fence, gored him with its antlers, and after he fell to the ground, trampled him. His granddaughter ran to call Rushton's wife, who immediately dialed emergency services. When officers arrived, they quickly contacted wildlife officials for assistance. However, as soon as everyone was ready to enter the fenced area and retrieve Gerald's motionless body, the deer displayed extreme aggression. No one could get the animal away from Gerald's body. Faced with the deer's relentless fury and the uncertainty of whether Rushton was still alive, the officers, in agreement with the wildlife officials, decided to shoot the animal, putting an end to the standoff. With the deer dead, authorities were finally able to enter the enclosure. Upon approaching Gerald, they confirmed that he had not survived. Gerald died shortly after being brutally attacked. Both the animals and the man's bodies were removed from the scene. Following the investigation, it was concluded that the deer was in rut, which likely triggered its heightened aggression toward both Rushton and the authorities. It remains unclear whether Gerald was aware that the animal was in rut and chose to take the risk anyway, or if he simply didn't know. Given his long experience with these animals, it is likely that he was aware of the dangers. Still, the entire incident was deemed a tragic accident. Authorities later informed the press that all the animals kept behind Rushton's home had, in some way, been trained by him in an attempt to domesticate them and turn them into pets. This case serves as a stark reminder of the risks involved in interacting with wild animals, no matter how long one has cared for them. The deer's rut-driven aggression ultimately resulted in the death of a man who deeply loved his creatures. In June 2011, in Putnam County, New York, Aletta Stacy, 56, owned an astonishing collection of snakes in her home. Despite her years of life experience, she overlooked basic safety precautions and common sense. Aletta kept no fewer than 75 snakes in her residence, many of them highly venomous, species whose venom could kill a person within 20 minutes to 3 hours. Yet, Stacy felt no fear, only an intense fascination with reptiles. Her boyfriend, Vito, 46, was aware of the creatures in her home. He could have encouraged her to donate them to a zoo or a specialized facility. But instead of warning her about the dangers, he simply didn't care. In fact, he even helped Aletta with the daily care of the snakes. Every day, she meticulously cleaned the enclosures and fed the animals. The snakes were well taken care of, housed in compartments in the most hidden rooms of the house. Although she legally owned many of them, some were illegal. On the evening of Wednesday, June 14, 2011, Vito was heading to Aletta's house. It was part of their usual routine. Although they were not married, they spent a lot of time together, alternating between their two homes. However, since the snakes were kept at Aletta's residence, it was more common for them to stay there. This way, they could care for the animals and ensure that none of them accidentally escaped. That evening, Vito left work and went straight to her house. As usual, he parked the car and went inside. However, as soon as he stepped into the house, something felt different, even strange. Aletta was nowhere to be seen, which didn't make sense since she was always home at that hour. This immediately raised Vito's concern, and he began searching for her, calling out throughout the house. After checking the more familiar rooms, he headed toward the area where the snakes were kept. At that moment, it was impossible not to think the worst. His suspicions were soon confirmed. Near one of the open snake enclosures, he found Aletta's lifeless body lying on the floor. Desperate, he immediately called emergency services. The paramedics arrived quickly, but there was nothing they could do. Aletta Stacy was already deceased. Her body showed bite marks, and the cause of death seemed clear: poisoning. The attention of the emergency responders and police quickly turned to the open enclosure. One snake was missing. Forensic examination confirmed that Aletta had been bitten by an Egyptian cobra, Najahage, one of the most venomous snakes in the world. The neurotoxic venom of the snake attacks the nervous system, causing paralysis, and without prompt treatment, it leads to fatal respiratory failure. Vito, in shock, reported that Aletta was extremely careful with her animals. However, something went terribly wrong that night. The police and reptile experts were called in to locate the missing snake. The reptile was found hiding in a corner of the room, near the heater. The officers were able to contain it safely, and the animal was later transferred to a specialized facility. The case sparked widespread attention and reignited debates about the ownership of exotic and venomous animals in domestic environments. Despite the tragedy, Aletta died doing what she loved: caring for her snakes. When Vito approached the body and checked for a pulse, he realized she was already dead. The small, open glass enclosure belonged to a black mamba, one of the deadliest snakes in the world. Reaching up to 4 meters in length, the black mamba is also recognized as one of the fastest snakes. A bite from it is a death sentence if help doesn't come swiftly. Without the administration of anti-venom within minutes, the venom from the mamba can cause death in just 20 minutes. Once emergency services arrived, the police were also notified. The entire situation underwent investigation. The snakes were seized and handed over to the appropriate authorities. The house was thoroughly searched for the escaped snake, which was eventually found. One of the greatest mysteries of the case was why Aletta did not seek help immediately after being bitten. This question remained unanswered, adding a layer of tragedy and mystery to the situation. The neighbors were left in shock by what had occurred. The snakes were sent to a zoo, where they would remain under specialized care. In early June, the police escalated their investigation, and what initially seemed like an accident began to take on new dimensions. Investigators, who had initially believed Aletta was bitten while cleaning the small glass enclosure where the snake lived, started to entertain a different theory. As the analysis progressed, the possibility arose that Aletta may have intentionally allowed the snake to bite her, possibly as an act of suicide. Aletta was an experienced handler, deeply familiar with the behavior and risks of the species she kept. Furthermore, the fact that she did not call an ambulance or seek help from neighbors after being bitten added weight to the suspicion. Doctors consulted later stated that she could have survived if she had sought medical help in time. This negligence, combined with Aletta's knowledge of the lethality of the snakes, strengthened the theory that the incident could have been intentional. The cases of Antoine Yates, Gerald Rushton, and Aletta Stacy highlight the inherent risks of domesticating wild or dangerous animals as pets. Although each situation involved different species, they all shared one commonality: attacks that proved fatal for Gerald and Aletta, and nearly for Antoine. Even with proper care, certain animals are not suitable for domestic life,